Welcome to part 26 in this series of videos on creating a purchase order system using Blazor and C#. In this video, we're going to look at deploying our almost complete application to Azure. Microsoft Azure appeals to me in that it's probably simpler to deploy a Razor application to Azure than the alternative of setting up a server with IIS and all the other requirements. However, in the spirit of this project, I want to keep the costs to a minimum. I've therefore signed up to the Azure Free Trial, which in theory should not incur any costs. But if you're following this course, be careful. I don't guarantee that it will be entirely cost-free, and you just need to be a little bit careful about which options you choose. To create an Azure account, the first prerequisite is that you have to have a Microsoft or GitHub account. I have an Outlook account and I use that. To create an Azure account, go to https://azuremicrosoft.com, and in my case it's English GB, but in your location it may well be different, and then click on the option for a free account. You will see that you'll get 12 months of certain services free, $200, which in my case is £150, credit for use in the first 30 days, and access to some always free services. If we scroll down this option here, you'll see the various options that we've got available to us. Some of this is pretty intimidating and a little bit impenetrable. If I go to the free account, I think it's on here that I want to look. Yes, you click that button to start for free. But as you can see, you get 12 months of popular services free, $200 credit for the first 30 days, which I don't intend to use, and some always free services. And I want to just bring your attention down to this. These are the free for 12 months. But if we go down and look in the FAQs, the one that's of particular interest to me is this one down here, 250 gigabytes of Azure SQL database, standard SO instance with 10 database transaction units. I think those are later called DTUs. So you'll see that we get 250 bytes of Azure SQL database. Now, what isn't clear on here is there are smaller instances, if I can call them that, of Azure SQL database, but I think we're limited to just this single database of 250 gigabytes. I did inquire of Microsoft and they just referred me back to this FAQ. So we'll treat that as just the one database. So going back to signing up, when you sign up, you'll have to provide your Microsoft account or GitHub account. You'll also have to provide a telephone number for verification. I had a text message with the verification code and a valid debit or credit card. To keep the Azure account live after the first 30 days, you'll have to upgrade to a pay-as-you-go account. You'll therefore need to be a bit wary about using services that could be costly. And all I can say there is just be wary. And note as well that I think that this Azure database is just for one single database. Anyway, enough of the caution and back to some programming. That limitation of one SQL database is going to cause us a problem. When we originally created the project, we added two databases, one for authentication and authorization, purchase orders auth, and another for the purchase orders themselves, purchase orders. On the basis that the Azure subscription only permits one SQL database, we need to combine these two databases into a single database. Fortunately, this is pretty simple. There are a number of ways of achieving this, but I believe what I'm about to show is probably the simplest. What we'll be doing is merging the data from purchase orders auth into purchase orders. And the reason I'm doing it that way round is that purchase orders auth only contains tables and data. It doesn't contain any views or stored procedures, whereas the purchase orders does contain stored procedures, and it's therefore going to be simpler to move them from purchase orders auth to purchase orders, or the data from purchase orders auth to purchase orders. So we do that by selecting the one that we want to export the data from, highlight it, right click, and then select tasks. And then right at the bottom, export data. A wizard is going to open up, and this is going to do all the hard work for us. So we simply select next. We choose our data source. Now from the drop-down list at the top, scroll down and choose SQL Server Native Client. And the server name should hopefully be filled in, but just for the moment, I wanted to highlight that and copy it to the clipboard. You'll see why in a second. Then at the bottom here, purchase orders auth also should default, but it can be selected from the drop down if it's not there. Now click next. On this one, on the destination, we also want to choose SQL Server Native Client, and the server name you might hope would be able to select from the drop down list, but it looks as if it's refreshing, but doesn't. Right, as you can see, there's nothing there. But we can actually copy and paste that data from the previous screen in here. So paste that in, then go down to the database, and we should then be able to select purchase orders. If it doesn't appear, select refresh. Click next, and we want to copy data from one or more tables or views. Click next, and we're going to move all the data. I don't think we actually need this EF migrations history, but I think we'll have it there anyway. Click next, and we'll run it immediately. And then click finish. And with a bit of luck, success. I always get this warning. I don't think it's anything to worry about, because all the data seems to get moved across successfully. So we can now close that. And if we now look in purchase orders, look at the tables. Actually, I should probably refresh that first. Look at the tables, and we'll see that we've got the authorization and authentication tables in there. So that completes the work we need to do in SQL for the moment. The next thing is to migrate the SQL database, our purchase orders database, to Azure. And so the next thing we need to do is to log into the Azure portal. This is a completely clean portal. I haven't added anything so far. And as I say, the Azure portal can be a little bit intimidating and a little bit confusing. For example, we've got SQL servers, SQL databases, and somewhere over here, SQL Azure. And you think, well, what's the difference between all those? I'm sure there are differences, but we're going to be concentrating on these two to start with. You may find the sequence along the top here is different to the one I've got showing here. The first thing we need to do is to create a resource group. I will give a link in the description below to a series of videos by somebody called, I hope I've got his pronunciation of his name right, Kudvin Cat. He's got about 20 or 30 simple to follow videos, YouTube videos on setting up Azure. I got most of the information I needed from that series of videos. I would recommend it. It's really good and takes you through things step by step. Anyway, we need to create a resource group. That's the first thing you need to do. So click on resource group, and we can either click create up here or create down here. It'll have your subscription, just leave that as free trial, and you'll need to give it a name. I'm going to call this Blazor code, and then RG for resource group. Just as a bit of background, a resource group contains things like SQL databases, app services, and things like that, and has the advantage that if you completely mess up, you can delete the whole resource group and start again. You don't have to delete all the individual components separately. I'm in the UK, so I'm going to choose Europe, UK South, but you can choose a more logical location for yourselves. Click review and create. It comes up with a review. It says validation passed. Click create, and that gives us our resource group. So that's stage one. The next thing we need to do is create a SQL Server. And as I said, don't get misled by the numerous options with SQL in front of their name. So what I suggest we do is go home, and it is that one that we want. No, it isn't. It's that one. It's the SQL Server that we want. If you can't find it there, if it doesn't appear in that list, if you just type in SQL, and you can find servers here. And again, all we need to do is just click Create SQL Server. It comes up with our subscription and our one and only resource group. And we need to give it a server name. And I'm going to call this you see, I think that name needs to be unique. And I think I've discovered that some of these things can only have, yes, it's got to be in lowercase. I'm going to choose the same location as I had before, and you need to give it a login and password. You need to create a server admin login and password. When you've entered a suitable server admin login and password, click Review and Create. It comes up with the summary there, and you'll see there's no additional charges. Click Create, and that will create the server. And it'll sit there with deployment in progress for a little while. I think this can take 3 or 4 minutes. When that eventually succeeds, click on Go to Resource. And you'll see here on the top right, we've got Show Firewall Settings. We need to configure this. So click Firewall Settings, and there are 2 things we need to do. First of all, you must make sure that says allow Azure services and resources to access this server. I didn't do that to start with, and I got in a bit of a pickle later on. So make sure you do that. And the other thing is to add your IP address, and that will allow you access to the SQL Server from your local PC. When that's done, just click Save. Success. Right, well, now go back home again. So we can see we've got the resource group and we've got the server. The next stage is to migrate the database, our local purchase orders database, to Azure. Having created the resource group and SQL Server in Azure, this part is remarkably simple. In fact, it could hardly be simpler. But before we do that, go to the server that we've created, and under server name, copy that to the clipboard. Now go to SQL Server, and on the purchase orders, the database we want to migrate, right-click, select Tasks, and then select Deploy Database to Microsoft Azure SQL Database. This wizard will lead us through, so click Next, and under Server Connection, you'll have to click Connect. In this box, delete that and paste the name of the server that we created in Azure. And under Windows Authentication, we don't want that, we want SQL Server Authentication, and enter the login and password that we created in Azure. Then click Connect. The new database name, leave as purchase orders, and this is the important bit. You'll see here the addition of Microsoft Azure SQL Database. It goes to basic with a maximum database size of 2 and the service objective as basic. Now the free one that I think we're allowed is standard of 250 gigabytes, and it's the SO. So make sure you choose SO there. That's the free one. I think if you vary from this, you could well end up getting charged. It creates a temporary file name. We can just leave that as the default. Click Next. It comes up with a summary. Click Finish, and it starts exporting it. This again will take possibly 3 or 4 minutes. When success comes up, we can click Close to finish it. And that's it. We've now exported the database to SQL Azure. And we can kind of show that here. If we select Connect, we can connect our SQL Server Management Studio to Azure. So if I click Connect Database Engine and put in the name of that server again, I should be able to connect. And there we can see the Azure connection and the purchase orders database in there. Now, before we can deploy the application to Azure, we need to make some changes. So let's go into Visual Studio, and I'll show you the changes we need to make there. Before we publish the application, there are a few changes we need to make to the C# code to take account of the location of the Azure SQL database and to remove some redundancy. The first thing we need to deal with is connection strings. So open Blazor purchase orders and edit appsettingsDevelopment.json. And in here, you'll see we've got 2 connection strings, one that's called default connection and one called SQL DB context. It doesn't really matter which of these we delete, but bear in mind that we've now only got 1 database, not 2. So before we had the default connection looking at the purchase orders auth and the SQL DB context looking to purchase orders. I'm going to get rid of SQL DB context. I say it doesn't matter which, but let's get rid of that. So I'll delete that completely. including the comma at the end of default connection. Now, the only place that SQL DB context is mentioned is in startup. So if we go to startup, what you should find, we've got default connection there. I'm just going to highlight that and copy it, because down here we've got SQL DB context. So we need to replace that. So now we've only got one connection string called default connection, and we've just got it in that one place. So save that. But now we want the default connection in app settings. We want this connection string to be replaced with the one that looks at the Azure SQL database. So we return to the Azure portal, and I go to Home. And under Recent Resources, we should see SQL Server. So click that, and if we scroll down, we should see the database. Click that, and up here it says Show Connection Strings. So again, if we select that, this will give us the connection string that we want. So the bits in there that matter are the ID, which is the SQL admin user, and password, and it's got that in curly brackets, your password. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going back to the C# code, and I'm going to replace the whole of that with the connection string from Azure. Now, the only thing that we need to do there is to replace the password. And you want to replace all of it, not just the bit that says your password. It needs to be the curly brackets as well. So that needs to be replaced with your SQL admin password. I'm going to do that off screen and then come back to here. Right, now I have changed my password in that default connection. So we should be able to run the application. And it runs, so that looks good. We're running it locally, but we are of course linked to the SQL database in Azure. And a simple way to test that is if we click tax rates, and I choose this one, for example, and edit it. I'll change it to 25% and save. It's now got 25% there. I'll close the application and we'll go to SQL, and in the Azure database, if we look at tax and edit the top 200 rows, we'll see that the exceedingly high rate now says 25%. But if we go to the database locally and look at that, that's still at 30%. So that shows that we're connected to the right database. The next task is to publish the app. The groundwork has all been completed, so we can now publish the application. So in Visual Studio, we'll save and close all the files, and we'll use the wizard that's built into Visual Studio to actually publish the app. It is actually surprisingly simple. So select the Blazor purchase orders project, right click and select publish. On the first screen, we're going to publish to Azure, so that's fine. Click next. We want the app service for Windows, click next. And on here, that should be free trial. The resource group should be fine. Don't bother with searching, but click in this button here to create an app service instance. and it'll be given a name, which is basically the name of our project plus effectively the date. That's going to form the part of the web address for our application. So we want to make that a little snappier than the name that was in there already. So adjust as necessary. I think these have to be unique across Azure. So you might find if you use Blazor purchase orders that I have already used it or somebody else has already used it. So you might need to put your own initials or something like that in there. Make sure that's the free trial. I've selected the resource group, which is in the UK South, and hosting plan. Now this needs changing because otherwise you might get charged. Select new and it'll come up with a hosting plan name. Again, it's the app project name with date and time. I think we can get rid of that. I don't think that matters particularly. I don't want it in central US, South Central US, so I'll select UK South. And this is the one you must change. From the drop-down box, make sure you select free. Otherwise you could end up being charged. Click OK. And then just double check that says F1 at the end and then click create. This could take a little while, so I might edit this if it takes too long. Right, that's now finished. We'll now go to next. And we want to publish and generate the pub XML file, so click finish. And we're nearly there. At the bottom, you'll see some service dependencies and it's got configure against these items. Don't worry about the SQL Server and database. We've already got those configured and our connection string is already included in our application. SignalR, I don't think there's any need to configure that for the moment. So these items at the bottom can be ignored. Go back up to the top and click Publish. This might again take time, so I might edit out some of the waiting. It's eventually published, so now if I log in, we've got our application up and running. However, I can see a problem. The dates are not in UK format and the values are again not in UK currency. So we'll need to tackle that. So I'm going to close the application and go back to the code. Close the publishing information. We don't need that. Now, I deliberately selected UK South as the location for the resource group, the SQL Server, the app plan, and the app service. And despite all that, I was a bit surprised to find that the date and currency formats weren't correct. I've done some more investigation into this, and it seems that we can control that, or should be able to control it from within the application rather than Azure. So to fix the problem, we have to add 2 lines to startup.cs. So if you open startup.cs, we need to add a service down here, which is add localization. And further down in the configure here, under routing, we need this. Now, to be honest, the documentation implies it has to come after routing. I'm not completely sure about that. And in here, you can see I'm using ENGB for English for UK, Great Britain, you might need to change that for your own local culture. Right, so let's save that, and we can go back and republish. Now, because we've got our publishing file already, we don't need to go through the routine we did before. We can just click publish. Just as an aside, notice that the site name is down here, and you can copy that to clipboard for later use if needed. So I'll click publish. And the application has started, and we've now got UK date format and UK currency. And if I go to, let's select one and preview it, we should see that it's correct with the date format in UK format and the currency. But we've got one other small problem. If I select that and email it, and then look in my email client, I can see that the link from that email is still pointing to localhost, and that's not what we want. So we need to change the link that's embedded in the email so that it points to the correct server. So to do that, we need to close the application and go back to the code. In pages index, this is where the body of the email is built up and it is sent from. So if we scroll down, we'll see that the toolbar handler deals with the email event, and at the moment the mail body, email body, is being built up with localhost. So that we need to replace that with the name of the correct server. So if I'm just going to comment out these two rows, and I have, I think, got the right format in here. So I can put that in and put that in, and you'll see that what we've got here is https://Blazor purchase orders.azurewebsites.net and then preview. The first time I did it, I managed to do it and I've omitted the preview order. You've got to have that in there. So we'll save that and go back to the project, and we can republish. So having started the project again, I'll highlight that order, email it again. It's gone. I'll go to my email client. I think it's got to me already. And now you can see we've got the proper link in there. So if I click that, we've now got the correct link, and you can see from the address up here, we're now going to the website to get the order. So that email could be sent to anyone and it will then work. So that's it basically working. However, there's a question in my mind. If I go back to the code, I'll close all this, about the identity manager. We've got the identity manager locally, and we can probably not bother to publish the identity manager. I can't see any particular virtue in that. We can use it locally, we can change the connection string in app settings so that it points to the Azure SQL database. So let me close this and we'll have a look at the Identity Manager. And in Identity Manager, we want to change the default connection to point to the Azure SQL Server. I've already made that change, so we should be able to run this as well. I'll save it and run. And you can see, although we're connected to the local host, we are connected to the Azure database. There's no easy way for me to demonstrate that at the moment, but you can take my word for it that we are connected. So that solves the Identity Manager problem. Not that there was a problem, but we don't need to publish that. So I'll close that. And I'll save that and I'll go back to our purchase orders. Because there's one other thing. When you're maintaining an application, it can be useful to link to the local database for testing and development purposes rather than the live version. Luckily, this is quite easily achieved. In the Solution Explorer, you'll see that we've got under appsettingsDevelopment.json, we've got another file called appsettingsDevelopment.json. And in there, I'm hesitating because I'm not quite sure what I've got in there. In there, we can make any entries that we need for local use. And what happens is that when the program is started, it looks in here preferentially whilst we're running the application in development mode. So if we look at appsettingsDevelopment, I'll just open that. We haven't got anything much in there, but we could look at appsettingsJson and we can take the connection strings section, copy that, put it in here, and we can replace that with our local SQL Server connection string. Let me go and find that and I'll copy and paste that in there. I've now replaced the default connection with the connection string for the local SQL database, just purchase orders, because that now contains both the purchase order information and the authentication and authorization data. So let's run that. And it's fine. But what would be interesting is if we go to tax rates, we'll see the exceedingly high rate is still 30%, and that indicates that we're still connected to the local SQL database for the tax rates. If we go back to the appsettingsDevelopment.json, I think it should also be possible to put parameters or variables in this file that you want to use for development purposes and not for the live system. For example, the location of the server for the link for the email. We might be able to put a parameter in here that when we were in development mode, linked to this current server, but when we used it in real life, it pointed to the actual Azure server. I haven't tried that, but I'm pretty sure that we should be able to do that in exactly the same way that we put in the settings for some of the email settings, the SMTP server and username and things like that. So that's something else that can be considered. Right, so just one more time, let's run it from the, let's publish, republish, and check that it's all working. Here it is. If we look at tax rates, we've got the exceedingly higher rate as 25%. Purchase orders, we can go in, we can edit. Let's choose one of these items and say we want 30 of them. Save. It all seems pretty fast to me. I think, considering that's running on a website somewhere, that's more than adequate. There are a couple of things I would have liked to have done in this project which I haven't done. I dearly wanted to send the email with a PDF of the purchase order. I haven't done that yet. I might still do that. And as far as the code is concerned, way back when we were saving orders, we're saving the header and we're saving the order line separately. That is another thing that should be tackled so that the whole header and order lines are wrapped in a single transaction. I might still have a look at that. But so far, I'm feeling pretty pleased with this. It's a non-trivial application. We've got it working on the web. We've published it to Azure. I'm feeling pretty satisfied. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have and feel like subscribing, please do so. I'll leave some information about links to Microsoft documentation and the tutorials for beginners for Azure by Kudvenkat, and any other links that I feel might be useful. Thank you very much for watching.